Subscribe to this YouTube channel by clicking the subscription button below. For future webinars and online short courses, please visit our website at australianwaterschool.com.au. Welcome to the 65th Australian Water School webinar brought to you by iSwarm. Today we'll be discussing basin modelling in the cloud, presented by Emmett, Peter Taylor and Carmel Paulino from CSIRO. My name's Trevor Pillar. I'm the National Partnerships Manager here at iSwarm and the webinar chair. This webinar series seeks to bring you the thought leaders working in the global water sector. I'm really hoping that it's going to be valuable to you today. Again, I'm sure it will be, having spoken to these three fantastic presenters. But look at that, everybody's here. A lot of people from across the globe. We're so glad you could join us, and hope you can do that again each week or fortnight when we're on. A ton of free webinars coming up across all areas of water management, water resources, and there's online courses and face-to-face courses. Go on our website, Australian Water School, iSwarm, and get all the details. That'd be really good. Right on to the main game today. Three fantastic presenters, as I said. Emmett Parashar from CSIRO is Principal Research Consultant at CSIRO Land and Water. Hi, Emmett. Good to see you there. In sunshiny, no, rainy, no, clear as a bell, Northern Territory, Darwin, if I'm right there.
Indeed, Darwin, far up north.
Thank you for joining us. Emmett's research is on partnerships and operationalisation and adoption of research and technology to improve water resource management outcomes. That was a bit stumbly, sorry about that. Peter Taylor, CSIRO, Data 61, is a Senior Software Engineer in Data 61. Nice to see you, Peter, up there in the sunny Sunshine Coast. No.
Thanks, Trevor.
The rainy
down south in Hobart.
The rainy Tasmania down in Hobart. Okay, it's good to have you across the country. It's great. And Carmel will be joining us later, I understand. Is a Principal Research Scientist at CSIRO Land and Water. You can see the years of experience on the page there right now in front of you. You can see the massive amount of work done in this area of Basin Futures modelling, and we're going to hear about it all today. Armin said to me earlier, how do you do these webinars? And I said, well, it's fairly light touch, really. We don't have $1 million studio. In fact, we showed what we do. It's very similar to Basin Futures, as I understand. A frugal innovation, I think you call Basin Futures. Well, it's a frugal modelling. If you touch a screen here, it's a green screen. That there's the entire office and my very erstwhile helper, Joel, behind. Thank you, Joel. It's such a pleasure to work with you, Joel. And you called it Jugaad Innovation, colloquial Hindi. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did indeed. That was very good.
Jugaad. I won't take up your talk for you. We will stop right here, and we'll hand it right over to you, Emmett, and to you, Peter, and maybe Carmel joining us later. That'd be great. We're in your hands.
Okay, thank you very much. Look, this part of the spirit of Jugaad innovation or frugal innovation is to making do with what's available, and that's really what Basin Futures is all about. So I'll do, in terms of the format of this presentation, we'll give you a brief context of why we developed Basin Futures and how it fits in with other modeling platforms and tools out there. And then we'll go into a demo, and then there'll be an opportunity for Q&A. But before I start, let me just introduce CSIRO. CSIRO is Australia's national research organisation. We're about 5,500 people. We've got a budget in excess of $1 billion, and we're sort of across Australia with around 55 sites around the country. So that, having just briefly introduced CSIRO, given the constraints on time, we'll go straight into Basin Futures. So a lot of what we developed, the reason we developed Basin Futures was because of our learnings in South Asia, in particular in India, and we delivered some capacity building projects there. And as part of a lessons learned exercise or a reflective exercise, we spoke to two constituents. We spoke to policymakers and we spoke to technocrats. When we spoke to technocrats, we asked them, how could things be improved for you? And their basic feedback was, well, we really need to do more with less. And by that they meant, they don't always have access to local data, doing a lot of data munging. They don't necessarily have the time or necessarily the skills in those types of data manipulation packages. Reduce the cost and effort required to do a basin scale study. And last but not least, really lower the barrier to entry And that's critical to some of the thinking that that's gone into Basin Futures development. Now, from then we spoke to policymakers, and they said, look, typically when we get a lot of input from our technical staff, it's more modeling focused rather than decision focused. So we set about trying to address these challenges in Basin Futures. The other thing that we asked policymakers is, well, really, what is it that you want? What are the key questions that you want answered from a water perspective? They sort of gave us three questions. One is, how much water do we have in our basin? What is the water productivity is, and who are the users of water, and what sort of benefits are we getting for it? And last but not least, is there opportunity for development? And so when we sort of bundled this together, we set about going, I think our objective was really to make basin scale assessments and scenario planning a lot more accessible and a lot easier. So to kickstart that process, we thought, well, what are the key roadblocks? And so we identified three, which is information. There's a need for innovation and taking new technological approaches as the world has evolved. So the first one is information. There's a general working assumption to answer all questions, even just range finding and basic questions of how much water you have. You need to have high resolution local data, and that's not always the case. We felt that global and regional scale data sets are of such high quality now, you can start using those as a good substitute for local data, just for those basic questions. From an innovation perspective, the science of water planning and the practice of water planning is really well explored, but the ease of implementation of taking the first steps is really difficult. So we felt that there was some innovation required in reducing the complexity of doing a very basic assessment and taking the first steps, and so giving the users a better experience in using the modeling technology. Connected to that is the technological side. Workflows are complicated, and one of the challenges that people have is finding the data, making sure that the data that they pick is relevant, and the data processing is quite cumbersome. And the outputs from most modeling tools is not something that can be readily accessed by policymakers. So there's a lot of post work that needs to be often required. So these are the key roadblocks that we set out to address through the Basin Futures platform. And so how did we do that? We basically went, if you like, to the cloud to reduce the complexity and put all that complexity and hide that from the user. So from our perspective, the first thing that we changed was the environment. We put Basin Futures onto a cloud platform, onto a scalable cloud platform. And recently we did a beta testing in India, and we transferred everything from an Australian cloud and we put it into Amazon India cloud, just as an example. So you can move it around easily. The second part of that is, that we wanted to make it as accessible to as many people as possible. So we decided to make it accessible through a web browser. And for those who are more technologically inclined, you can access Basin Futures APIs and integrate that into your own workflows. The second part of that is that we've really focused on user experience. So we've created a whole bunch of dashboards, scenario analytics, and reports so that people can engage with the system in a very user-friendly way. Then I think the third part of it is that we've by design, we designed a tool through which you can share and collaborate with a whole range of stakeholders and engage policymakers. So, and that was one of the other reasons that we used a web platform, so that when you need to engage with your constituents, when you're doing your water resource assessments and engaging in what potential scenarios that you could potentially invest in, at least at a high level, then you can do that. You can do that very easily through a web and a digital environment. Further to that, one of the big challenges was, what data sets can I use? Where do I get access to these data sets? So we've tried to solve that for you, at least from a global perspective. We've got a whole range of global and regional scale data sets that are integrated into Basin Futures, including climate scenario outputs, gridded data sets, time series, and with some ability to upload some of your own data or your own information through the parameterization of the models. And the last but not least, we've got a bundle of models, scientific models, rainfall models, and the like, all connected to the data, which is all sitting on the cloud, so that when you as a user come, you can really focus on creating value rather than hunting for data and working on those sorts of very time-consuming aspects. We really wanted you to focus, users to focus on the scenario side rather than just the data collection phase. So that's Basin Futures in a nutshell. But some of you may be wondering, well, where does Basin Futures sit in relation to this model or that model? So when we started off this project, we really wanted Basin Futures to be something which answered some very basic questions without too much effort or cost from the user's perspective. So we try to follow the 80-20 rule. The 80-20 rule is we want to give users 80% of the value for about 20% of the effort. And that's fundamental design principle for Basin Futures. Something that gives you defendable decision-making, that it's fast and can help you, basically, it creates a pathway from basic and helps you go to the more sophisticated platforms. And that's key for us. We're not really trying to reinvent the wheel, if you like. We're trying to create a specific niche around a tool that helps people transition from basic to sophisticated. From a value proposition perspective, we're quite different. We're very much focused on the low cost, low effort, very much a service-oriented approach. It's very much focused on user experience and design. And the other thing that we do is we actually give you a very standardized workflow. That has two benefits. One is that it's actually very easy to learn, and it's actually very easy to remember. These are the and it also simplifies things for you. So those are that's part of the value proposition. We don't do everything. We try to standardize the workflow for you so that the learning curve is very low. And in the recent workshop that we held for a beta testing, it took our users about a day and a half to learn the model. And within 2 days, they'd actually delivered some case studies of basins that they were interested in. From a performance perspective, we wanted to reduce the need for you to have high performance computing and basically transfer that to the cloud. So that has been key. And the other part is, of course, to make it a repeatable process that you can share with others to say, well, here's the evidence of using global data sets and regional scale data sets to come to this particular conclusion of whether this is a viable option or not. So that's part of the key to what we're trying to do. Now, from a user types perspective, people often ask us, who have you targeted this for? Well, we've done it for a number of different people. We've done it for capacity development. If an organization is interested in building their capacity in basin planning or basin scale assessments and basin scale scenario planning, then this is very much a tool that is a good starting point, and then help transition to more sophisticated and complex models. Basin Futures is a pretty complex model or sophisticated model. It's just that we hide a lot of these things from you. Also for water planners, consultants, and researchers, where they're trying to do a wide variety of studies in water availability and different scenarios. And of course, national scale or regional scale water security assessors as well. So that's a very quick thumbnail sketch of what Basin Futures is. Now I'll hand over to Peter Taylor, and he'll give you a presentation on, he'll give you a demo of the product itself.
That's great, Emmett. That's laid the foundation for this. Fantastic. Can we just have one question, Peter, Emmett, before we move straight into that demo? Mwenya from Zambia has said, what's the significance of basin modelling in relation to irrigation development in developing countries?
Well, I think the significance from, I guess, our perspective is, before you make that infrastructure investment, what you really want to understand is that a sustainable development process? Will you have enough water going forwards with climate change projections and these sorts of things? So before you make those big investments in highly detailed studies, you might want to come and look at Basin Futures and say, well, what does it look like? What's my current water availability look like based on the data that's available? And then how does that relate to climate projections going forwards. And that's one of the scenarios that we try to address in this, and you'll see
that's great. Thanks for your question. When you as a irrigation engineer in the Ministry of Agriculture in Zambia, so thank you for that. We won't take any more. Just keep questions coming. That'd be fantastic. But we'll move straight into the demo now with Peter. So over to you, Peter.
Thanks, Trevor. Thanks, Emmett. Just bring up my screen. Thanks everyone for your time. So I'll run through a quick overview of the Basin Futures tool, which is, as Emmett described, it's all web-based, so we're trying to keep it low footprint. And I'll touch on different parts. It's, there's a fair bit to it, but I'll try and give you a sort of a quick run through of some of the key aspects. Essentially, it's broken up into sort of probably three main parts. The initial part, which is what we call Basin Idea, which is around exploring basins and understanding your basin from different perspectives around water and giving you access to global data. The second bit is around building up a model and understanding your baseline model. And then the third is really around scenarios and exploring the results from your models and looking at comparisons between different development scenarios. So I'll start off with the Basin Idea tool, which is really sort of a global tool which looks at basins around the world at different spatial scales. So it uses a data set called hydrosheds and allows you to click on any basin in the world and start to get a breakdown of data about this basin. So here I've clicked on a basin in India and I'm getting a breakdown on the land cover, with percentages and areas of different types of land cover, and you can see some key spatial features here around the river, and there are things, some on-the-fly calculations that are done around population estimates and catchment size, as well as a number of different aspects around protected areas. So identify some of these key sensitive areas, which you can see here, which you can zoom through to and get more details in these sections. There's a bunch of indicators around water stress and availability and variability, which are indicated on the side here. And there's also data around freshwater fish species, and this is all data taken from the IUCN Red List. So it'll give you a breakdown on endangered status of particular species in the basin, as well as actual species details. So you can get particular details of fish species, and all this data is linked in through the IUCN. And this tool allows you to go anywhere in the world, so I can jump out from India and have a look around and go over to some basins in Africa. Again, just showing you that you can come down to different spatial resolutions here and click through, have a look at the Juba here. And this one's showing the upstream area of this basin as well, that there's a number of contributing upstream catchments. And it shows things like transboundary basins as well. So you can see here, this one crossing Ethiopia, Kenya and Somalia. So it really is designed as a global tool to allow you to come in and really just get an idea of your basins and understand some of the global data sets that are here. There's also things like more hydrologically focused data around the river network and storages, and things like administrative areas as well. So it gives you a bit of a taste for the Basin Idea tool. The idea from this point is that you can step through and then start to build up an initial model. So I can hit this create model button and I'll go through to a model setup stage. And this bit is around selecting your input data sets into your baseline model. So we have a selection of global climate as well as regional climate data sets. So this will give you some recommendations based on where you are and what data is available. And you can bring up information about where these data sets come from. And our idea here is to really to be transparent around the data that we provide, and we keep updating data sets, and you can always go off and get the information around the source of the particular data that's being used. the idea is that you can break your basin up into sub-catchments, sub-basins, or reaches as we call them in the model. And this can be done in two ways, either using a predefined sub-catchment breakup, or you can even use a manual breakup. And this is where you come in and you're able to click through on the river network and define some key points that you'd like to break your basin up. And it will do an on-the-fly calculation of the upstream catchment areas for those based on those points. So it'll go away, and again, this is all the calculations are done sort of in the cloud, and here you can see you've got a breakdown of your basin. So if I'm happy with that, I can go through and continue on to my to set up the rest of my model, and it will save your model and set up all the defaults. And it will also submit the generation of climate data into the cloud system. So from this point forward, the system is running in the background and processing your data using the background processing. So while you work on your model, it all gets done in the background. So in terms of working on your model, there's a range of things that you can configure through this model for each of your reaches, and they're kind of listed down on this panel here. There's a rainfall runoff calibration and setup process, and there's a wizard to assist in doing that. There's a facility to have interbasin transfers and look at where you have transfers of water coming from either neighbouring basins or between your internal catchments. There's a storages configuration component. So this looks at what storages are in this particular reach, and you can see here that it's using a global database to find and locate these storages within a basin. So it's got estimates of the size of the storage, and you can just add those in if you're happy to include that in your particular reach. There's also configuration around hydropower generation and some additional information around dimensions of the storage. There's a agriculture and irrigation section, which is sort of relevant to the question that was raised earlier, and this is around configuring existing crops and the soil types. And there's one of the key sort of things we want to do with the tool is to really drive the parameterization and setup of the model with the best sort of global data that we can get. So it does provide you with estimates of existing crops within this basin, so around rain-fed and irrigated crops, as well as land suitability breakdowns in terms of sort of land that is suitable for irrigation and development. And so you can come through and set up your crops through this process. You can even add crops that are recommended from the estimates. In terms of demands and water use, there's a configuration around that is based on a dynamic calculation of that reach population, and it splits up into urban and rural water use in terms of litres per person per day and the percentage split. And you can get some, relevant global averages around those numbers here. And there's also obviously an industrial demand component, which looks at the amount of water used from industry. There's a environmental flows component as well, which allows you to set percentages as a monthly pattern, which looks at target environmental flows through the system. And this can be done on a per reach basis. So that sort of runs you through the key stages of configuring a reach, and you can do this for all of your reaches. I'll just load up a model now and show you one that has been previously configured, just so I don't need to run through the whole system. I guess a key point here is that all your models are stored, and you can load up your previous models, and they're all available on the cloud. And you can also share with other users of the system, which allows sort of easy collaboration and sharing of models and results. So I'll just load up a basin that we've done some work on in India called the Brahmani. And here you can see I have 5 scenarios set up. the top ones here are baseline scenarios, and they just all use different climate data sets. So you can allow you to do some comparison between different types of climate inputs. And then the bottom two are around different development scenarios, so looking at agricultural development and an agricultural and additional dam construction. So essentially you can load up these and configure these scenarios individually. But what I'll show you is the setup of running these scenarios to allow you to sort of enter into the comparison and visualization stage. So again, here you can click through. I have the scenarios that were listed before, and you can choose the specific scenarios that you'd like to run. And there's options around the time that you'd like to run the model for over the climate period, as well as if you'd like to run particular climate projection scenarios, or use things like a dynamic population, which looks at extrapolating out well, calculating on the fly, if you like, a population through time. So I'll run these models, these scenarios. Again, it's around having this all cloud-based. The idea is that we can run these quickly, so they will get run in parallel, and it will go through and submit these into a job processing setup. And you can see it's running each of the 3 scenarios for the 30 odd 40 years that I selected. And so I come through to results from my basin, and I get some breakdowns of some key attributes, so around the mean annual runoff and PET, as well as outflows from the basin. And here you've got a spatial breakdown of the runoff contributions from each of the subcatchments, as well as some numbers around the precipitation and ET from each of the reaches. So you can see along here that there's different result sets, and I can I'll just go through quickly through these ones. The reach hydrology gives you an idea of some of the sort of key time series and outflows of the system, as well as storages, your domestic demands, and it will also show you a reach by reach breakdown of your annual water balance, and looks at also patterns of monthly flows, as well as your main climate parameters. So it gives you an idea of seasonality within your system. And you can obviously choose different reaches to get a breakdown at particular subcatchment scales. So for the moment, I've got this as selected as one of the baseline scenario. You can change this to get an idea from different scenarios. So here, for example, I get some numbers around my agriculture in terms of crop productivity and some key indicators for the initial setup. And you can change this to look at your agricultural development scenario, which will give you a breakdown of the productivity under that particular scenario in terms of crop yields and water productivity, as well as some initial economic data, if you like, around the value that you're getting from your crops in terms of those yields. An interesting part here is around the comparison of scenarios. So, for example, I can go to this indicators tab and start to look at, under these different scenarios, what are the changes in terms of water availability, including things like reliability of my storages. Under my agricultural dam scenario, I can see here that if I change to that scenario, it will give me an indication of the change that's occurring in the system. So here I've got some additional storages, and these numbers here are showing me some reliability numbers in terms of each of those storages, and an overall stress rating. So you can see that the stress has changed on the system under this development scenario. There's also some information around gauges. So we have a global database of gauging stations, which allows you to do some initial comparisons between the model data and the observed data. And again, this is under each of the scenarios, so you need to have an understanding of what changes you made and how that relates to sort of historical data. But this gives you an idea on how you can at least start to look at some comparisons between the gauge data that we have in this global data set. There's also a tab around hydropower generation, which will give you some reporting on storages, either existing ones or proposed in the future in terms of hydropower yield. The environment tab here gives you a tool to do a comparison between essentially between two scenarios that you select on the baseline, one on the comparison side, which will give you a visualization around the changes in flows in the system. So this is obviously important from multiple perspectives, but often it gives you a bit of it's useful for an understanding of how the system's changing under these scenarios in terms of your high flow pulses and low flows, your maximum flows and that sort of thing. So it gives you a spatial breakdown of where those changes are occurring in terms of the alteration, as well as against each of those key metrics on this heat map down below. So you can see that the changes across the reaches as well as the sort of metrics. So that's kind of quick run through from start to finish of the system in terms of Basin Idea, and then building up a model and visualizing and comparing some of the scenarios. And this is all areas that we're sort of actively working in to sort of develop and understand how people like to use the system. So I'll pause there and I'll pass back to Emmett to just give a bit of a summary.
Okay. Look, thank you, Peter, for that presentation. Look, going back to, I guess, what we started off and the key questions that we're trying to help people, our users with, was really about information, innovation, and technology. So the information that people wanted was really around, how much is the water, what's that water productivity, and how does that water availability change under different development and climate scenarios. So we've shown you that Basin Futures can sort of help you with that process in a very rapid way. From an innovation perspective, I think we've created a pathway, which is really going from very basic modeling and helps you get to more sophisticated models. And in terms of the user experience and how we've sort of bundled a whole range of models and data and scenario planning, visualization, all into one value chain, if you like. From a technology perspective, from a user perspective, it's a much faster process. It's cheaper and hopefully reduces the barrier to entry. And we feel that
your PowerPoint's not on at the moment.
That's okay.
That's okay. All right, it's okay. It's on you. Yeah, all good.
And that's really focused on, making outputs that are very much decision focused. So that's really what the value proposition is. Now, there's a couple of closing remarks. Firstly, thank you very much to IceWarm for hosting us here, and thank you all for coming. And the last one is that Basin Futures is, because it's a web-based platform, it's also a multilingual platform. So we've done some experimentation because Peter is a pretty good speaker of Spanish, but he's very modest. So we've actually tried implementing Basin Futures in Spanish just to test out how we do it. But we're actually very much open to implementing it in different languages as people want to use those sorts of capabilities. So I'll stop there and hand back to Trevor.
It's fantastic, Peter. Emmett and Peter, thank you so much for your time on this. It is an easy to use pathways from basic to sophisticated hydropower, crop data, population projections. This is actually taking things to a new level, particularly modeling like this. I mean, I think of gaming scenarios. I mean, as Peter was going through those demo, I thought to myself, oh, show me the basin around Adelaide. I won't go on because there's a few questions we want to get to here too. But well, look, one of the questions, it is friendly, user friendliness. The interface is fantastic with the colours and the bar graphs. Can anyone access other people's models? Just a quick brief, like you make a model, other people?
No, so you can if you want to share it with someone else.
Right. Yeah.
So not only if you want to share it with anyone else. I mean, even we don't have access to. So if you create a model, Trevor, don't have access to that. Only you have access to it.
Yep. No, that's okay. Well, look, let's go straight to some of these questions, which we'll get some of the bottom of this. Elizabeth Phillip from Hamilton in Canada has asked, how do you access Basin Futures? Is an account required? What's the cost? If you have a look at your Q&A screen, Emmett and Peter, you'll see your mic's not on, Peter, either. How is a hydrologic model incorporated? Is only water balance first order, or any situ gauges used, river discharge? You can see the question there. It's quite long, but it's going into depth. Thanks, Elizabeth, for your question, by the way. It's really
so if you like, Trevor, I can have a crack at the first question and then handle all the rest.
Might have to keep them reasonably short. They might have to go into
I certainly will.
Read the book after.
Elizabeth, we're going to have another phase. So we've just concluded a private beta. So in the coming months, we'll open up for a second beta to show some more capability within Basin Futures. So if you're interested, we'd love to have you on as a beta tester. So, and that goes to all participants here. If you're interested in using the system and helping us test it and make sure that we get all the bugs out, we're more than happy to get you on board. I think in terms of cost, we want to make this as accessible to as many people as possible, and that's one of the reasons why we designed it for the web. But we are in beta, and I guess what we're also trying to figure out is how best we do that from an ongoing maintenance perspective. So that's a discussion that's still being had internally. But I'll hand over to Peter now.
Yeah, so I think there was the secondary sort of aspects of the question were around gauges as well. So can you add gauges? At the moment, we have access to a global database of gauges, which includes gauging data from a lot of different countries, and it's better coverage in particular areas. There's also the possibility of integrating with regional gauging databases. So in Australia, we have a national system that we can incorporate, and the idea around adding your own gauge data is one that's on that's been discussed a lot, and it's one that we're looking at in the future. So if you want to do a comparison against your existing gauge data, then provide an upload mechanism for that. We have that function in there to allow you to do time series of basin exchanges if you have that sort of data. So it would be extending out from that.
We'll press on with the questions, and one from Patrice in Geoscience Australia, in Canberra in Australia. Is it possible to add geology and soil grids?
Okay. At the moment, there's not the ability to add your own geology or soil grids. There's a set of categorical parameters around soils at the moment, so it's not possible at the moment. What we tend to try and target first is good quality global data sets, because it's applicable to any basin. So we try and do that, and then we go down to regional data sets. So if there's a good quality regional data set for soils, for example, then that's something that we would look at including into the future.
Yep, sounds good. Thanks, Patrice, for that. Sorry, go on.
Or if there's a custom need, if you like so Patrice, if you're interested in having an instance of Basin Futures running in your organization or for the problem that you're trying to solve, then you can certainly add those custom data sets for a particular focus area or region, as Peter said.
Yep. And in all of this back and forth, if you're interested, by all means, shoot email to Emmett or Peter at csiro.au, or here at Australian Water School. By all means, let's get the conversation happening, the discussion happening. Joe from GHD in New South Wales, Australia. How do you balance competing expectations by different community sectors, e.g. farmers versus environment? Let's have a crack at that.
Oh, okay, it's a good question, Joe. I'm not sure that. I guess there's a consultation process that you typically have to go through, and that's I guess agnostic of tools. So I think from our perspective, we're providing people with a platform to engage with, so that they can put forward the evidence and they can actually engage with the evidence. but in terms of managing competing expectations of different parts of the community, I think that's more of it's a different sort of social process to what we're offering.
It's about the data.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I'd add to that. It's just the idea is this tool sits in a broader, process of integrated water resource management or basin planning that you would have to be set up as part of. So, yeah.
Yep. Thanks, Joe, for that question. Siamsul from Indonesia, University of, and I can't get the university. Let's
get on. Crack at that one.
Yes, that in my region, the greatest barrier is how to engage the stakeholders. Sorry, I'll just read it out for them. So it seems my region's greatest barrier is to engage. Could you please outline how to overcome this barrier to engaging stakeholders?
So it's a great question. So one of the ways that we were having discussions once again with our beta testing team, and one of them sort of put forward the notion that one of the big challenges that they had in the Indian context was that there are a lot of government departments looking after water. But wouldn't it be great if they could all see the same sort of scenarios and look at the same evidence base through a website and then engage with that in a more fruitful way? So that's one example of how you might take a bunch of, I guess, stakeholders who are engaged in technology, engaged in these sort of modern methods, and bring them to the table and help facilitate discussion around what different scenario outcomes could look like.
Yep. So Lucas Peralta said, I would like to know something about the uncertainty of the model. Have you compared the model results to the real world data, gauge data, etc.? Maybe it's a Peter question.
Yeah, it's a good question. Yep. So the idea with having access to that global gauging station database is to do those comparisons. So the recent beta workshop that we held allowed the participants to go through and do some of that analysis and look at how well the model was going against those gauging stations. And it's obviously a broad model and it uses global data, so there are certain trade-offs in terms of the uncertainty, but the results for the basins that we were looking at in terms of the comparison was looking pretty good. And the idea is that we want to provide tools for people to allow them to do that analysis as part of that process. So tools to look at, how well it's going against a gauging station. And we've got some tools in development looking at how the different rainfall data sets perform in particular regions so that you can select a data set which is more applicable to the area that you're working in. So it's really about trying to give those users the ability to do that, and we want to be transparent as much as possible.
Comment, Emmett?
No comment at all.
It's good. Well, we'll take our last question right now. It's from Amali. What is the scope of coverage of Basin Futures, and how do you cope with data source areas / regions with lack and/or inadequacy of climatological data?
Mm-hmm. So it's just similar, following on a little bit from the concept of the previous question, but in terms of what we do, we try and make use of the best available data that we can find out there, and this is a constant moving landscape, and there's a lot of improvements that are coming in terms of global climate data, both from the sophistication of Earth observation data, but also the blending of these data products from using local on-the-ground station with Earth observations and other sort of model data as well. So often these data sets will be a combination of those. So in areas of data scarcity, they will often either try and incorporate models or Earth observation estimates in those. And there's quite a few comparisons around how these perform in different regions. So there, within those data scarce regions where there are less stations, they don't perform as well, but there is good analysis, and often you'll find that when there's areas where they don't perform so well, the research tends to focus on trying to either have a particular regional data set. So for an example, in Africa, they tend to, there's been some poor performance on some of the global data sets because they use local stations. You might find that regional data sets that focus particularly on that area, climate in that area, will try and improve that, and that certainly seems to be a pattern that we see in the way that the data sets come out.
Well, I reckon we're there, Emmett. No comment on that question is from yourself. No, that's fine. It is an incredible situation. I was going to ask a question of yourselves, though. Also, back in my mind, I was going, Peter, when you were running the demo, was that coming out of live web straight to this webinar right now, straight off the web at that speed? Yep.
Yeah, that was all live. So that was we have at the moment the system's running in the Nectar, which is a Nectar cloud, which is an Australian research infrastructure cloud.
Yep.
As Emmett said, we've also had it running in Amazon Web Services in India, which is the technology's come a long way for being able to run this stuff quickly and wherever you want. So
quickly is the word. Well, I was amazed. I thought he's got a canned demo showing us. Surely, No,
it's not canned. That's all live. Yeah.
I'm not trying to be overselling it, but that's impressive. It is impressive, and it comes out of a team of yourselves, Emmett, Peter, and Carmel, cross-discipline and obviously hard-working, and it's more than hard-working. It's hard thinking. Yeah, it is outstanding to see what you've come up with here, and hope we can do this again down track.
Yeah.
A few months' time, there'll be more development.
We'd love to.
Yep.
We'd love to. Thank you very much.
No, it's been really good. So any closing comments, and we'll call it a day. But I want to thank everybody for their participation. Please be in touch, everybody. Emmett would be keen to hear from you. So would Peter and Carmel. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Emmett. Thank you, Peter, Carmel.
Great.
We'll leave it
Thanks
there
so
for
much,
now.
Trevor.
Great.
Thank you, Trevor.
Been a pleasure.
Okay.
Bye for now.
Goodbye all.
Subscribe to this YouTube channel by clicking the subscription button. For future webinars and online short courses, please visit our website at australianwaterschool.com.au.